handout of my presentation here, which is why I'm looking down, but effectively, it involves the simulation of the ULS cases, and through predefined restraint conditions, member sizes, and force applications, the model, a simulation of the model will indicate what those failure mechanisms are. And then
tell me about a member, a particular member.
So if I ask you to look at pieces of my report, a lot of the horizontal members, particularly the top and bottom core of the truss member, were incredibly difficult to get to work. And that was because you had very large compression forces which were going through it, and their span was quite significant. And the restraint, of course, at the non-cantilevering end, at the cantilevering end, was not very stiff because it was provided by a similar facade plane.
So how would that have failed?
Well, it would have failed through lateral torsional buckling.
That have broke down the whole structure?
It could have if the structure was structurally indeterminate, so in essence there was sufficient safety in there for if one member fails, then the whole structure won't collapse. However, one needs to be quite careful because, for instance, that truss I was discussing, if that one went, then all of a sudden the structural concept behind the behind the facade is no longer there. So one would have to analyze the structure without that member there to determine whether a global failure mechanism is triggered by this single failure.
So in essence, you spoke in your report about reducing the design wind loads.
Yeah. What
were you doing? Were you taking a wind loading condition and optimizing the member sizes? In other words, reducing the member sizes because of to make them work more efficiently, or were you reducing the wind loads because of a consideration of the geometry of the building, and therefore imposing less loads on the structural members?
So it was a bit of a cyclic. It tried to converge toward a solution, and if I can explain that, earlier in my report I mentioned that there was a predefined structural zone by the architects, and consequently that meant that was. Was
this the subframe supporting the facade, or was this the structural frame of the whole building?
Just supporting the facade.
Right.
And the reason why it was there was purely because of the through wall build-up that the architects had developed. And if I might elaborate on the earlier point, basically what it involved was looking at the size of those members and trying to get them to work within that predefined structural zone. Now, when they couldn't work, that was through a first pass at defining the wind load, which effectively was quite conservative. However, then when I started to look at how I could include factors such as orthography to take account of the townscape, I realized that I wasn't incredibly comfortable in determining how much of a reduction was suitable for a building of that size and where its failure would be, in terms of the impact it would have on people, is just tremendous. So I appreciated that it was beyond me to be able to do that on my own, and consequently I was very fortunate that within Arup there's a gentleman called Mr. Alsop who helped write the wind codes. So he's the person who I liaised with, and effectively he was able to be more confident around the orthography factor, which should be reduced, which should be incorporated. And then, as I was speaking about the cyclical convergence, then it also involved speaking to the architects, saying to them, if we put some more proliferations in the facade itself, then we will be able to reduce the wind load further, so it will actually work, which hopefully is shown on. You see my report on page 2. You'll know in the middle of the facade, for example, and toward its corners, there's significant openings, panels, and that again was done to reduce the wind load. So I did that through liaising with the architects and basically trying to ensure that their concept was still there, but that I could also produce a solution which worked.
Was this done purely on paper, as it were, or did you do any kind of model analysis, or?
There was substantial modeling analysis which was done. There were, of course, hand exercises which were across to verify the modeling which had been done and to for me to be able to size some connections. But the main model was done on General Structural Analysis, which is an in-house Arup software, which I, with my team, linked into Grasshopper, which is a parametric analysis tool, which lets you run multiple simulations of something to reach an optimization, and that's effectively the exercise which was done here.
If you were involved in this project again, what modifications would you have suggested to the architect or to the overall structural engineer to perhaps mitigate some of the risks?
So I think the unfortunate instance here was that the Riyadh Metro project was moving at an incredibly fast pace, and consequently there hadn't been much structural liaison at all prior to the architect submitting their first drawings to the client. So that's why I was in the situation that I'm describing. However, if I were to go back and be present prior to those drawings being submitted to the client, I would have explained to the architects that there would have absolutely needed to have been some cross bracing, some appropriate bracing at the corners of the facade. This would have largely helped with restraining them, as well as preventing certain buckling by reducing the effective length of members.
Right. Whose decision was it to specify GRC?
That was the facade designer's decision, but that came through me encouraging a lighter material. Initially, they were, if I'm not mistaken, they were going.
So your responsibility was the supporting structure for the facade, but the actual cladding, as it were, was that manufacturer or was that a consultant?
So the whole project was delivered, the consulting services were delivered by Arup as a multidisciplinary firm. So these were designers within Arup who were specific to the facade.